agroecology and ecological and social. We have Rébeka Frazer-Chiasson. She's in Rogersville in New Brunswick, and she has a diploma in globalization and agriculture, and it's much more than just reading. And for her, agriculture is very important to her. She is passionate about food sovereignty and sharing her knowledge. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Rébeka. Thank you, Maina. I hope everyone can hear me. And if you can't, let me know or write it in the chat. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the discussion. And like I said to Maina and to everybody else, I hope that we can have a conversation. And I already went into one of the breakout rooms, checked in there to see who was there and what was discussed, and it was very impressive. I find it very impressive, the diversity of experience and knowledge that we can see in these types of sessions. And I always feel I don't feel like I am always in a position to present, and I hope to learn from you as well, from your knowledge as well. I find it funny to be here in the food mentorship program because 10 years ago, I was working for the Réseau Groupe Communautaire, the community group inclusion group, and that started in 2012, and that was a part of the provincial government's poverty reduction strategy, and it was to give resources back to communities and to the remote regions according to priorities in different regions. And food security was really something that came up a lot. So I think that was the program that launched the other program, the mentorship program within the communities. And that was something where we could, I was able to provide information on the Miramichi region and surroundings. And so it's nice to see how much that has progressed, and that whole political stream and more deeper reflections on food and the food guide, which obviously is very important, but not just that, various programs feeding people, be it through food banks or collective kitchens, which is very important, but also what comes behind the production, health, the soil health, etc. So that's something that I want to bring in terms of agriculture here and agroecology. I'm going to share my screen a few times, like right now, just to let you know what I'm doing now, where I live, and what the Terre Partagée farm is and entails. So you should be able to see the farm's website. This is 2 years ago, this video that you can see here, but that was at the same time of year, the last harvests of the season. Today is our last basket that we're sending out. That's kind of our main pillar for the community CSA baskets, and people subscribe to this for a full season, and we deliver in-season fruits and vegetables for several weeks, and then we go to Moncton to do the 18th week of baskets. So the first is, I think, 16 or 17 weeks, and then it continues into the 18th week. So we also have green manures that are planted. We have carrots, the last carrots that we're pulling out. We got onions that we need to dry. So we're a farm. On our logo, it says that we were established in 1896. It's not deceptive, but that was the time that my ancestors came from Cape Breton to set up here. And it's between Miramichi and Moncton, 100 kilometers north of Moncton. And I grew up on the farm here, but I didn't do the type of production that we're doing today. My father was a farmer for his whole life, and he still does pork and beef raising. And we were known as the capital of Brussels sprouts at one point as well. So we do the big, they did big grain crops, 100 acres of Brussels sprouts, and other vegetables as well. There was a big cooperative of farmers that depended on one buyer, which was McCain Frozen Foods. And they sort of let the region go when they could get better prices elsewhere. So I didn't intend to do agriculture. I went to study in social justice and globalization at St. Thomas University, and that's what brought me to ask these same questions and have these same kinds of reflections that you're having during your sessions on food justice, access to healthy food, on food sovereignty, not just to produce, but to have access to food regardless of our origins and regardless of who produces it and on what soils the food is produced. I came back in 2012 to the farm to start doing a bit of agriculture. It wasn't a really good comprehensive solution. I was doing various other projects as well. And then in 2014, we started the CSA basket program. And that requires a bigger investment in time, really full-time and more. So we became a workers' cooperative in 2017. We have 4 members that work on the farm. And the goal is to not only to just have the heritage from like to pass it generation to generation, but open to it up to other people. And one of our members, Pierre Olivier, came from Quebec to be able to farm in a cooperative, collective setting, and also to have access to resources that we have here, like land, knowledge, equipment. If you have any questions later, you can ask them with regard to the farm operation, but that's really a summary of what we do at the farm. We do vegetables. We're also doing turkey, pork, chicken, and beef. We also do eggs. We offer a diversity of products in Moncton, in Bathurst, and the surrounding region. I had the opportunity to discuss a little bit and to hear your discussions about the Climate Action Guide. I don't have any expertise in climate change to offer you, but it's in the guide. You know that agriculture is, whether it be in Canada or elsewhere in the world, is definitely a producer. Agriculture is a producer of greenhouse emissions, obviously because of pesticides, transportation. Obviously nitrogen fertilizers that are used in the soil, tilling the soil, which releases carbon into the atmosphere. In Canada, we have 12% of emissions are associated with agriculture, and in the world it's up to 26%. I think that was in the guide, I don't remember. But what is promising is that it can also be a significant it can also mitigate climate change. So just to talk a little bit more about that, I'll show you a short video just to give our interpreters a real challenge here. It's also in French, but it's also just to show that the production that we consider the most harmful in terms of the environment and climate change, beef raising, if you do it in a way that's more, if you do it in a better way, that can still be a source of mitigation of climate change, in fact. So I'll show the video now and then we can talk about it after. Do I have to re-share my sound? I imagine I do. I'm going to try this here. Cows are something that can combat climate change. We can't eat beef in the amounts that we eat it currently. This is the fat of the land, beef. This doesn't exist anymore. We know that beef is polluting. Canadians produce 716,000 tons of CO2 every year. We believe that 16% is due to agriculture. A third of emissions come from methane, from ruminants. To produce 1 kilogram of beef, we can produce 10 kilograms of CO2. It's 5 times more than for pork and 10 times more than chicken. Is it possible to eat beef and not feel guilty? Most of cows in Quebec are fed with cereal, with grains. And this is the cows grow faster this way than if they are grass-fed. Several cereal producers will turn their soils, and this produces more. This releases more emissions into the atmosphere, and several use also nitrogen in the soil. But when we use too much, the microorganisms in the soil start producing N2O. That is laughing gas. But this is not funny here, because the production of N2O is 30 times more significant in terms of climate change. We're heading to Saint-André-Avelin in the Outaouais in Quebec, and we're going to meet Paul Slan. He produces grazing beef, and he believes that it's so good that he believes that it's carbon neutral. I'm very comfortable. Watch out where you're walking. This is Paul Slan on his farm. He has 200 heads. He believes that they're not polluting. It's the opposite. For me, cows are one of the things that we can use to combat climate change. It's rare to hear that we hear this. Cows to fight climate change. This is Paul's land on which his cows live all year long, and they are exclusively grass-fed. Instead of leaving them to graze where they want, he uses a different technique. It's adapted grazing in different enclosures. He changes their location day to day and migrates them across these different parcels. It's inspired by bison. They take the carbon from the air and they put it into the soil. It's the plants that do this, in fact. So on the soil, we have obviously the roots underneath and the leaves above. So these need to stay alive. So you have to do a good rotation in order to ensure this. So after being grazed, the roots will grow new leaves, and it will transform this gas from the air into glucose. And a portion of this helps redevelop the root system, and a part of this will die off and will become sequestered carbon in the soil. Once the carbon is more, it's one of the types of carbon that are the most stable in the world. It's just these roots that stay in the soil. And with these types of, we can return more carbon to the soil this way than the cows produce themselves. So this is not what we are used to hearing. And these are obviously less polluting because they are grass-fed, which is less calorie intensive than the commercial operations where they are all fed by grain-fed. So it's the rotation that really allows the herbs to play their role, to allows the grass to recover. We can't just leave the animals in a field of grass and expect them to put carbon back into the soil. Can you still hear me?
Okay, cool. Merci.
Great.
Puis peut-être que c'est toutes des choses que vous connaissiez déjà.
Maybe these are all things that you know already, but I hope that this gives you an idea of the immense potential that we have with this type of agriculture, and whether it be in New Brunswick or in Canada or elsewhere. You can take a production that's considered one of the most polluting types, and we can really imagine that we can sequester more carbon than we produce, and this can become an incredible resource. This can be done with vegetable production or other animals as well, animal operations. The problem that we have, or the problems, with regard to these huge opportunities, is that there are very few farms, less even in New Brunswick, but elsewhere in Canada as well. It's difficult to expect to be able to make significant enough changes because we only have a few farms in our area. And the second problem, obviously, is that these few farms that survive or that are continuing or that are added have very few resources and capacity to make these types of changes. So those are two big problems, and I want to hear your ideas about that. In terms of having more farms, it's not just individual changes that are required. We need more support to help with succession. In Quebec, just to give an example, someone who starts a farm and that has studied in agriculture, because obviously in the first place in New Brunswick, we can't even study agriculture. So if an 18-year-old wants to go into a career in agriculture, has to go outside of the province. Whereas in Quebec, you have several options for training and education in agriculture. And if they finish their education and start their farm, they get a subsidy of $50,000 to start their farm. Even if they didn't do education in agriculture, they can get a subsidy up to $25,000. I know several farms that started like us in cooperatives with 5 people who did training or education and have $250,000 to start their farm. And that's not, without even counting. There was a farm that wasn't able to get this funding because in their region, they recognize the importance of having these types of farms in their area, not only for social, but for social reasons, but for environmental reasons, etc. So this is really a long-term vision, and so we really do have a big. It is tough to get started in New Brunswick as a farmer. once you've started your farm and got it up and running, and if you can still survive in agriculture, we don't have any institutional purchasing policies. Someone in the breakout room was saying the use of libraries to prepare meals. We can maybe discuss it further because I feel this is a great idea. You could take food that was recycled, recovered, if you will, and you transform that and freeze it and for future use, and it's available in schools and in libraries. What a great use of our public institutions to make connections, whether it be through the community or education or building relationships and taking people out of their silos, their isolation. Clearly, these are activities or actions that require there are several institutions like this that do feed people through public funds, be it hospitals, schools, it can be nonprofit organizations, and what can be produced. This can increase the potential of what can be produced in New Brunswick. It's a big opportunity, but it also creates a lot of frustration because for years we've had plans from the government local purchasing. I can't actually remember what it's called, the strategy for local food, but it doesn't include this obvious thing. It's using the dollars. We're using a lot of these dollars to bring in food from elsewhere to feed New Brunswickers. So that's at the institutional level, but we also have to improve access to local food because we have people who buy from our farm. We know we go above and beyond to produce, or sometimes these people have to go above and beyond to find us or to buy in large quantities because they have to go a long way to get it, or they have to share a space to freeze food with other people because it's not simple. It's not easy, as easy as going to the supermarket, which is open all the time. So you have to think about it. So you have to, have the resources to be able to sign up in the spring, and every year you have to go to the market, and it's not easy to do these things. So we can talk about the financial aspects, but there's also accessibility to what is produced here. So this is an issue.
D'avoir cette ressource qui est comme presque disponible pour nous.
So here we have this resource which is available for us for climate change mitigation, but we can't use it because it's not supported enough and it's not realistic to imagine that all these young and not so young people will jump into agriculture and will be part of the climate solution. We just don't see this wave of farmers coming along. Donna's talking about that in the chat about bringing this program home. We can't imagine that there's going to be this great wave of new farmers, even if they think that climate change is the most important issue for our generation. Because there's no resources for startup, and there's no resources to support you once you have started up. So let me say one more thing before we take a break. I think because my screen is still up. My farm started out of the Union Nationale des Fermiers, the National Farmers Union in New Brunswick, that's the provincial chapter, which is part of the national organization. This is organization which brings farmers together in the belief that in union there is strength, and we don't see each other as competitors but collaborators. The mere fact of feeding our communities and fighting climate change makes us all collaborators. Here's this report that came out a few years ago called Tackling the Farm Crisis and the Climate Crisis.
Many
of us, and probably many of you, believe that the climate crisis will define our generation, and our reaction to the climate crisis will determine the future of the human species all over the world, including here in New Brunswick, and for all of our generations to come. What the NFU has done is to propose the same thing, the importance of responding to the climate crisis, but also responding to the farm crisis, which has been existing in Canada for decades, and recognizing that the source of the two is similar, but especially that solutions could also be similar. So when we talk about the farm crisis in Canada, well, farm debt is over 106 billion in the aggregate and has doubled since 2020. So only 5% of farm revenue actually goes to farmers. The rest of it goes to, in Canada, the rest of it goes to seed companies, multinationals, agriculture, fertilizer, pesticide sellers, machinery salespeople. Anything, basically farmers are surrounded by profit takers, and all they can do is be price takers. There's not a lot of income left over once all of those folks have got their money. And so what is proposed to fight these two very closely connected crises is that if we can get away from these parasitic multinationals, which are benefiting from profiting from agriculture in Canada, moving towards, for example, organic or carbon neutral beef, this might give us more independence as farmers, and may enable us to take home a bigger slice of the farm revenue pie. I don't want to get into too much detail here, but I want to give you this as a resource, because this report was quite long, but it is divided into these different chapters here. And you can get it in English or French. You can get into, for example, farm emissions, and you can look at, for example, here, these are information sheets. You can look at how you can reduce emissions at the farm level. Here you see it in English. Things you can consider on your farm for reducing emissions. For example, reducing nitrogen fertilizer use, or farm building emissions reductions, tree planting, shelter belts, so forth. All these things can be discussed after the break. We can get into all of that. But I want to ask you, and we can discuss this maybe a little bit before we take our break. What do you think of when you hear the phrase farm emissions reductions? What strategies can be used to on any individual farm to reduce emissions? I'm giving you clues because right here on the screen, obviously. And somebody's asking whether there's a resource to measure farm practices and their emissions effect in New Brunswick. Maybe someone from Food for All could answer that, but I don't know if there's a resource as such, but there are environmental farm plans, of course, which can be applied at the farm level. Consultants who will come over and assess your practices and their emissions effects, and then suggest or help you craft a plan to reduce your emissions. There's a low-till, no-till. Those are ideas that are suggested here in the chat. Composting, crop rotation. In other words, not having monocultures of the same crop in the same place every year.
L'utilisation de fertilisants, puis se servir d'outils de
fertilizer reductions, precision tillage as well. So you're getting a lot of ideas here that I'm seeing come out good. People can see people can read the chat to see some of these ideas. Wetland conservation, tree planting, and in unused spaces. Whether you're dealing with market farming or another type of cropping, agroforestry.
Garder des abeilles, quelqu'un dit aussi.
Beekeeping.
Puis n'hésitez pas si vous voulez aussi allumer votre micro puis proposer quelque chose.
Feel free to turn your microphone on and jump in at any time. You can write it in the chat, but you can also speak into the meeting. Reminder, spoken comments and written comments will not be included in any recordings that we have on the website. Now, perhaps we should go on to the next step, which is to take a break. And then after the break, we can come back to discuss some ideas of things we can do on our farms at an individual level to actually reduce our emissions. And also we can discuss governmental resources or ideas or ideologies or ways of thinking of our society which can give us more tools and capacity for existing and new farms to implement these ideas. We also have a farm income crisis, as we were saying, and it means, and these things may not increase farm revenues or represent monetary investments. That is why the NFU, let me put this back up, and another group that has come into being in recent years is Farmers for Climate Solutions, FCS, which is a coalition of groups, including the NFU. This is a group of farmers or a coalition of organizations that want to take action for climate, to mitigate climate change, but need more resources to do it. So they are proposing here political solutions. They're saying, look, this is advocacy work, right? We have to lobby government For example, when it comes to the CAP, the Canadian Agricultural Program, with monies coming from the federal government to the provinces to support the farming sector in each province. That they've been lobbying so that money goes increasingly to climate mitigation type farming measures. Or here is we're talking about a budget of 300 million for 2021, which puts a much bigger emphasis on reduction of farm emissions to try to help us achieve the Canada's climate reduction goals, emission reduction goals. This is an example of a farm-based organization where people got together to say, look, we want to make change, but we need funding to do it. If we want to have a bigger impact than each individual one of us can do working alone. And what we mustn't forget to talk about when we talk about agroecology is it's not just that group of actions. It's not just techniques that you may or may not apply. It's a movement. It's a political movement.
In Mali,
there was a major forum on food sovereignty. We'll get back to that term as well. But agroecology was defined as the how-to, if you wish. Food sovereignty is the goal, and agroecology becomes the guidebook, the roadmap towards achieving the goal as a movement. So they say here, for example, I like this particular sentence here. Agroecology is political. It calls on us to challenge and transform the power structures of our societies. We have to put control of seeds, biodiversity, land and territory, water, knowledge, culture, public goods, and community spaces into the hands of those who feed the world. We're talking about the farm crisis in Canada, and it's because all the control of all of these things, over all these things, whether it's seeds, land, knowledge, is not in farmers' hands. It's in multinationals' hands. So you can't have an agroecological system if you don't have control over the means of production. And same thing, here we have see the relationship to food sovereignty. Now, which is a concept you may already be familiar with, because it is very closely related to food security. Food security is a very laudable and important objective. We want to be able to feed people in a culturally appropriate and healthy way to ensure that they can maintain a healthy lifestyle and so on, an active lifestyle. But food sovereignty goes a little bit further, and it says that it's equally important for the long term to make sure that we have control over our means of production. And this comes out of that same food sovereignty forum in Mali with Via Campesina, which is an international movement of peasants and small farmers or farmers in general, which says that it has to benefit the communities and their environment. So this is the point I wanted to make. There may be others. Let me take this off the screen. Hang on. While I'm on this screen, I want to come back to these two concepts. These are some resources which could be useful to you to look at in greater detail. Again, one comes from the NFU, and this is a booklet called Agroecology in Canada, Food Sovereignty in Action. And the two are closely linked. Again, these two concepts, agroecology and food sovereignty, because food sovereignty is the goal, but agroecology is the how we get there.
en étant actif au niveau de la crise
while remaining active in fighting climate change. So this booklet can be read on the web. And you see here the pillars of agroecology. And if you also offers paper hard copies if you wish, if you like to distribute them.
Podcast.
Another thing is a podcast here that has 9 episodes. It's in English. It's called Who Will Feed Us? Here, just give us an idea of what's on each episode. It's made by farmers, and they often invite other farmers, people who are specialized on various matters. Corporatization here, the control by multinationals in agriculture, land access, the real cost, the true cost of food, migrant farm labor and solidarity. We got an episode here on seeds. I know that was mentioned as a practice, an agroecological practice. There's also a problem there with control over seeds outside of farms. There's one on agroecology here as well, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we... Thank you for sharing all these resources in the chat. Someone's saying that, will it be included in a resource somewhere? Mina seems to be saying that yes, that will be in the email that I'll send you at the end of the session for this week. I can say this at the end, but feel free to find me on Terre Partagée's website, or you can write me through the Union Nationale des Fermiers as well, the National Farmers Union. I'm not sure if we got into enough detail about each concept, but we can continue. I just want to be sure to have enough time, though, for these discussions and to know what's relevant as a mentor in this food space, even if we're not farmers, or even if we are. How do we on a daily basis put these ideas in practice, big ideas like agroecology that require the deconstruction of the capitalist systems that we work within, or food sovereignty, which requires, well, within the current economic model that we're in, we could never attain real food sovereignty or self-sufficiency. One person can't ensure his or her food sovereignty. It requires mobilization and the participation of entire communities. I took a few notes, but I would like to hear from you either in the chat or you can just turn your mic on and take the floor. Someone, and I know there's a large diversity of experiences here and different motivations, different things that drive you, but it could be whether it's somebody who manages a community garden or a food bank or a food or a kitchen. I just want to know, these are all relevant matters, so I just want to start that discussion. So one of the things that I was thinking of was that we should acknowledge the contributions of farms. Obviously, that's quite difficult to do when we're working within programs that are underfunded, but farms are also underfunded and really strangled and are just disappearing at an alarming rate. I don't know if you're seeing it as much as us, but every spring, this matter of discussion is what farms have stopped production and won't be at such and such a market, or they're taking a break. And we know that a break really means probably they won't come back. So we need to get away from the charity model. I think in general, that's one of the big goals that we have with the mentorship program in agriculture. And we want to know so when we have the capacity and we're managing a program and we're making requests for funds, we need to ensure that we're able to cover the costs of producing food as well. So I just want to put that idea out there, and I know there are other ideas coming in the chat, and I can see that. So someone is talking here about the guaranteed minimum income. That absolutely could help. We could debate about the details of how the model would be implemented, but having the time and capacity to farm without the pressure to ensure a big enough income to pay for regular things in life, to ensure that your kids can get clothes and get food, and you can go transport them to where they need to go. I get the impression that we would see more farms starting up if we could guarantee this. I know there's a program that exists that is about helping self-employed persons, and it would give you a 1-year salary while you're getting your startup up and running, be it for farmers or small businesses within the community. But clearly, in 1 year, you're not going to have insured your income or revenue as a farm. So it's something that's more long-term that's going to I think that something more long-term would be more relevant, in fact, that could guarantee an income over the long haul. Someone is saying, could the basic income model have the same impact on cost as milk has had on consumers? Milk in the Maritimes is so much more expensive than elsewhere in the country. I'm surprised that milk is more expensive here than in other provinces. I know that it's more expensive than in the United States or in other countries, but I know that the program is based on a federal government program that guarantees a minimum price. It's based on studies on consumption figures in each province to equalize or to match consumption and production. So minimum income, would it increase the cost of basic foods? I don't really see why. In Ontario, it costs $5.79 for 4 liters. I'm not sure if that's more. I don't know if that's similar or more expensive than here, but I think it's quite similar to here. Previously, she was talking about the supply management system of the federal government for milk. The minimum income, what impact would that have on food prices? But we're far from getting farmers to get paid for a fair amount for their production, the food that they produce right now, because there's too much money that's caught up. The 5% of the agricultural revenue that goes elsewhere to distributors, or you have heard all the stories about multinationals. They made huge profits during COVID, while everybody else had to was really stretched thin, and cost of inflation. Really, we fed into the hands there of the multinational corporations and made profits. We want to get a fair value for our production on small farms. Someone's asking what the relationships are with the Department of Agriculture and whether the government is open to these policies that favor small farms. Short response, no, absolutely not. In New Brunswick, there's a lack of comprehension or just a totally different ideology. And agriculture is seen as a GDP driver and for exports, and we really focused on the production models that exist already, and were such as, well, blueberry production, cranberries, and maple syrup and potatoes. Even if we've been told directly in meetings with ministers and various government personnel, you come back and see us when you can sell millions of pounds of blueberries in China. That's the reality right now. The Minister of Agriculture has no vocation or facet that includes feeding New Brunswickers. There's no Ministry of Food if it's really about exports and generating significant revenues, but nothing otherwise. We could create strategies on local food that are promising, but they're doing less and less as the years go by. That was one of the things that I noticed, so thanks for bringing that up. As a food, as an agricultural mentor, I think we have a responsibility. And you can think about how you're going to participate in your community as a mentor, and that's and to take action. I think we also have a responsibility as citizens, informed and engaged citizens on the agricultural front, and in terms of, so we really need to push for changes while acknowledging that this can be on the agricultural crisis. Our individual actions can drive us, and they can keep us engaged, and so that we can change our collective ideology and our government actions. And this can change the way that we conceive of agriculture, the whole framework. We could have more openness with municipal officials. People who are in New Brunswick know that with the change in municipal boundaries, I hope that there will be a certain openness when we consider, first off, the communities will be larger and will probably include larger agricultural areas. And this will take account of the vulnerability of our agricultural and food systems. So I think there'll be a larger or stronger desire to have control over that on the local level. So I believe that this is a good opportunity, a good time to go and meet with local officials, municipal councils, and to speak about what actions we can take and what capacity we have, because obviously municipalities don't have a lot of money, but they can make decisions. They are the decision makers on zoning and attracting the next generation of farmers and offering better access to local food to communities. Maybe I'm just an optimist, but I think it's a good time as a mentor and an engaged citizen to meet with a new council that might be more open-minded and ready to listen than previously. It's tough to read and to converse at the same time with all the ideas that are coming up in the chat. So I'm sure that I've skipped over some. Jeanne d'Arc was saying, if farmers want to ensure a decent annual income, they must sell to supermarkets at a higher price. So purchasing local food, local vegetables is really for the rich. We have a lot of expenses, and it's the same thing for all farms. Obviously, we don't get all of our income from this, but we're not indebted up to our necks, either with all the machinery that we need to do our 100 acres of crops that we're going to sell at the grocery store. There are pesticide companies, fertilizer companies, and often the price for consumers will be the same or less, especially if we're talking about raw products that people can process at their homes, in their homes. It's an idea that may be true or perhaps practical for multinational companies and for grocery stores. I don't think it's less expensive. The advantage of selling to grocery stores is that they have sales, and they can liquidate large stock at very low prices, ridiculously low prices. But the majority of the time, it's similar or often more expensive. And there's the distinction from the conventional products when we sell organic products. Often now, those products will be sold, in fact, for less money than conventional products. Fertilizer prices have increased because of the war in Ukraine, and conventional products have gone up a lot in the last year. The price has gone up a lot. Two other points regarding mentorship that we could talk about more specific ways of doing things. It's to put emphasis on the source of food and the health of our soil and so you can think about the climate crisis And that's equally important as you know, eating healthy food. And the last aspect that I would speak to, and I've seen it already on your board in other sessions, and that's how do we celebrate the sacred nature of food. And I think a lot of you recognize this and know the connections and how important this is and how sacred it is to bringing everybody together. So how do we share that with, or as a mentor, I suppose? Those are my points, my 2 points. But I was wondering if you have ideas concretely on what that could mean in terms of practice.
Puis, je voulais aussi juste mentionner à Myriam parce qu'elle disait...
Also, Miriam was saying something. Is there a way to use funding to subsidize the cost of local products? Well, there is some funding from the Ministry of Agriculture. I believe it's called local, not quite local food fund, something like that. We'll find you the link. It gives you an additional amount for creating an event, for example. If you want to set up a collective kitchen, they'll give you extra funding if you can use local products in that kitchen or in that, let's say, restaurant, you know, community restaurant. Well, I think I've covered the ground, but being in the breakout was just a foretaste. I'm be curious what other people are thinking now. And after all, you've joined us here and over the lunch hour to talk about food. So do you, I can't think of anything else that around which we gather to that extent as food, and maybe it's the solution to our climate problems. Let's imagine that. Let's make sure that we find the tools necessary to do it and support the farms that we have, but also we need to create an environment that's conducive to new farms coming on stream and making more connections among all of these folks who are here from farm to table. And all we can do is better. There's the future is ours if we seize it. I think that's a great way to bring this to a close. Thank you so much, Rébeka. I feel really moved and motivated and inspired, and grateful for everything that you've told us, all of your expertise and the resources you shared with us as well today. It's been really good.